Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 1195 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today, I'm having an absolutely fantastic conversation with Christian, who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in his early 30s quite recently. Nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan. Don't forget to save 40% off of your entire order at CozyEarth.com. All you have to do is use the offer code JUICEBOX at checkout. That's JUICEBOX at checkout to save 40% at CozyEarth.com. I know that Facebook has a bad reputation, but please give the private Facebook group for the Juicebox Podcast a healthy once-over. Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. Hey, if you're a Type 1 or you are the caregiver of one and a U.S. resident, the T1D Exchange is looking for you. They need your answers to simple survey questions, which will help to move Type 1 diabetes research forward. T1dexchange.org/juicebox will take you about 10 minutes. Complete the survey and you are helping. US Med is sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast, and we've been getting our diabetes supplies from US Med for years. You can as well. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. Use the link or the number, get your free benefits check, and get started today with US Med. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the Eversense CGM. And sure, all CGM systems use transcutaneous sensors that are inserted into the skin and last 7 to 14 days. But the Eversense sensor is inserted completely under the skin, lasting 6 months. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox.
Hi, I'm Christian DeLaslo. I'm a relatively new type 1 diabetic from about a year and a half ago. And excited to be here to talk with you.
Christian, how old are you?
I am 33.
About a year and a half ago. Let's get started. Was your diagnosis a surprise, or do you have type 1 in your family?
Complete surprise, no type 1 in my family.
Any other autoimmune in your family? Celiac, hypothyroidism, stuff like that?
Nothing.
Got a bipolar uncle?
Nothing.
Sometimes people say, well, I don't know if it's been diagnosed, but I do have that uncle.
Yeah, no, I've nothing. And that's why it really was a shock.
Yeah.
And it was caught. I basically went in for a routine physical. I was healthy as can be. Went in for a routine physical like I do every year as a good boy. And got my routine blood work done. And my GP found that my blood sugar, I think it was 122, which on the surface for a healthy 32-year-old at the time, or maybe 31-year-old, was like, okay, whatever. Maybe you just ate lunch. And she reran it for the A1C. And she found that it was, I think, in the high 5s. And she thought, that's a little weird. Or maybe even low 6s. And sent me to an endocrinologist, got more blood work done. Turns out I had all 3 antibodies off the charts of what's measurable. So basically, they caught it just at the start of it. I was still making nearly full production insulin. I had COVID about 6 months prior. And my endocrinologist is under the impression that probably could have been involved in triggering it.
Yeah.
And she had several other patients where she's seen similar patterns. So I do wonder about that. But not that it changes what I can do about it, right?
No, of course. But Christian, viruses precipitate diagnosis all the time. So if you have the antibodies, you're predisposed. When having 3, I mean, I don't want to speak like out of school, but it's pretty much a slam dunk that you're getting type 1 at some point. Now you just have to wait for something to happen for your body to go, hey, he's sick. I got confused. Let me do this now.
Exactly. So once they found those, they basically said, we don't know how long you have. You might have 3 months till you need insulin. You might have 3 years. We don't really know. So they gave me this sort of spiel of, start pricking your finger and start watching your carbs that you're eating and keep an eye, right? And as that gets more difficult, we might have to reassess. When was this? sort of March of 21.
Okay.
No, 22, last year. It was about 2 months after we found out that we were pregnant with our first child.
Oh, wow.
So it was a lot of news in a couple months.
Yeah.
And over that, pregnancy period in my honeymoon period where I was not yet on insulin, I obviously wanted to kind of stretch that period as long as I could from like a mental perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably pushed it too far. I had gotten an appointment with a different endocrinologist that I wanted to see, but I couldn't get in until the following February. So I basically pushed and pushed, eating less and less carbs to try to keep the sugar in control until I got to February.
Mm-hmm.
But in doing so, I lost like 30 pounds.
Yeah. So DKA.
One lesson, if you want to lose weight, don't eat carbs. It works. On the other hand, if you're trying to stave off needing insulin when you get diagnosed, don't go too long.
Yeah, no, I see that for sure.
It's really hard to gain the weight back when you lose so much of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that honestly has been my biggest battle since, is trying to gain the weight back.
No kidding. Christian, I hate to do this, but Arden's home right now and she's still sleeping and I don't love her blood sugar. I'm going to pause for a second and I'm just going to leave you sitting here.
All good.
I apologize. I'll be back in 2 minutes.
Please do. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I'm back. I'm recording again. Sorry about that. Arden is home from college.
Oh, good.
And she's beginning to use the tiniest little bit of a GLP medication for probably, I think the two diagnoses are insulin resistance, basically around what is probably PCOS symptoms, which is a lot of like words for a guy who's only had diabetes for a year and a half. But she's only on the introductory dose, 0.25 micrograms, and her insulin needs are now starting to shift. So
interesting.
I just had to I've been moving her insulin sensitivity, her basal, and I haven't touched the correction factor on the food.
You're where I'm at. You're in the moving target phase again.
Yeah, bro. Well, and it's moving quickly. So if I'm not mistaken, her insulin sensitivity has gone from 43. So 1 unit moves 43 points to 1 unit moves 62 points.
Wow.
So it's a significant
Which
change.
Is more like mine. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what I was just doing now. She got a little low because her daytime basal rate just isn't working anymore. It's fascinating. I can't wait to talk about it more with people, but not what we're here to talk to you about. So let me refocus myself. You get diagnosed. You don't know what's happening. You just are in the middle of your first pregnancy with your wife. She's only in her first trimester. You're probably a slow onset. That's how they set you up. And you think, I'm guessing, let me get the insulin part pushed till after the baby arrives. Was that your goal?
And as far as possible.
Yeah, right. And then
because I want to get as much baby under the belt as I can before I have to deal with that.
It's funny because if you would have known me then and come to me, I would have said, Christian, do the exact opposite. Like, know what you're doing before the baby comes, because Murphy's Law, right? Like, it's going to your pancreas is going to raise the white flag, the day after the baby comes home or something like that. You're going to be doing both things. So is that about what happened? Diabetes comes with a lot of things to remember. So it's nice when someone takes something off of your plate. US Med has done that for us. When it's time for Arden's supplies to be refreshed, we get an email. Rolls up and in your inbox says, "Hi, Arden. This is your friendly reorder email from US Med." You open up the email. It's a big button that says, "Click here to reorder," and you're done. Finally, somebody taking away a responsibility instead of adding one. US Med has done that for us. An email arrives, we click on a link, and the next thing you know, your products are at the front door. That simple. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. I never have to wonder if Arden has enough supplies. I click on one link, I open up a box, I put the stuff in the drawer, and we're done. US Med carries everything from insulin pumps and diabetes testing supplies to the latest CGMs like the Libre 3 and the Dexcom G7. They accept Medicare nationwide, over 800 private insurers, and all you have to do to get started is call 888-721-1514 or go to my link, usmed.com/juicebox. Using that number or my link helps to support the production of the Juicebox Podcast. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the only CGM you can take off to get into the shower, the Eversense CGM. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. Well, I mean, sure, you could take the other ones off, but then you'd waste a sensor and have to start over again. But not with Eversense. Eversense is a 6-month wear implantable CGM. So if you want to take a shower without anything hanging on you, pop off the transmitter, jump in the shower. When you get back out, put it back on, and you're right back to where you started. Come to think of it, you could do that whenever you wanted to. Maybe it was your prom night or your wedding day. Maybe you just don't want the thing on for a little while, but you don't want to go all through the hassle of taking it off and having to restart it and, starting back over with like wonky numbers and having to, all that goes with it when you take off a CGM and put it back on. Oh, but you don't have to do that with the Eversense CGM. Because Eversense is the only long-term CGM with 6 months of real-time glucose readings. This gives you more confidence, more convenience, and flexibility. The Eversense CGM is there for you when you want discretion, a break, or maybe just a little adult time. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. Pop that transmitter off, pop it back on, you're right back where you started, without any wasted devices or time.
What happened is the shit hit the fan pretty much the first day of my paternity leave. So my paternity leave turned into diabetes leave, right? Which was unfortunate. It was bittersweet, right? It was very fortunate that I was able to be off work for 6 weeks to focus on learning how to use insulin for the first time. But it was also really unfortunate to have that time sort of stolen from what was supposed to be dad-daughter time, right?
Yeah. Was your wife pissed? I mean, not at you, but I would have been. That's why I'm asking.
No, she's been amazing with it.
Oh, good.
We sort of staggered our leaves. She obviously was off right away when she had the baby and had a good long maternity leave. And the baby was born at the end of September. Mm-hmm. And then around February is around when she went back to work and I started paternity leave. So we staggered them to sort of spread it out.
Yeah.
So around February of this year is when I basically was coming home from a course that I was teaching and I finally went in to see that endocrinologist and, to your point, got in there and they were like, you need insulin and carbs now or you're like going to die. I was starving to death.
Yeah.
So got started right then. I did about a week of long-acting injections only until I had my Omnipod training, and then got started with the pumps. I've never done MDI at all.
They gave you enough. They gave you basal for a week and then got you right to a pump.
Correct.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So I've never actually shot fast-acting insulin in myself ever.
For meals or for corrections. It's funny. You started off. I thought the comment in the beginning, wow, your GP really knocked it out of the park. Like, what a great catch. You know what I mean?
Unbelievable GP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I even like the setup of how they were like, look, this could be a long onset. Like they were probably thinking you could even have LADA and maybe it might take years for you to need insulin. They didn't know.
Yeah.
But you were the rate limiting factor here because you were trying to cheat the system and you didn't give up when you were doing that. Yeah. Well, I understand what you were trying to do, but how much did you weigh when it started? What do you weigh now?
When it started, I probably weighed about 165. I'm 6 foot. By the time when I got on the pump, I was probably down to about 135.
Wow.
So I lost about 30 pounds.
Holy hell.
And then I lost more. So I often hear, oh, you get put on insulin and then finally your weight pops back up. That did not happen for me.
And you stopped eating low carb at some point too.
I did, yeah, but slowly, right? Because every time you stop eating low carb, the more you increase the carbs, you're sort of scaling up the insulin as well, which mentally is such an interesting journey to sort of take on. You feel like you're taking on more and more risk every time you shoot more and more insulin, which probably isn't actually a healthy way to think about it. The more I work with it.
It is not.
But it's a very natural way to feel about it when you're new at it.
Yeah, no kidding. I felt that way. I understand what you're saying. And I think everybody else does too. It's just like, wow, it feels like, wow, this is a lot. Like, where you just
it's still hard. Like I travel a lot. When I travel, I lose weight every trip because I don't know all the reasons. I think part of it is I'm more risk averse. I'm trying to be extra careful because I'm alone. I'm traveling around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm in that situation, I really, really, really don't want to risk going low.
Yeah.
And I'm only going to go low. I learned from you from going high, right? That I think I just hold back. I'm almost nervous to eat when I'm traveling. And it's hard to find healthy food to eat while traveling in airports and stuff. Those are the toughest days.
It's terrible. Like, really, I say on here all the time, like, get good food. And then I go out in the world and I'm like, where the hell are people getting good food from? Like, everything I see is garbage.
Sweet green, man.
Yeah.
I order sweet green in every city I go to.
Oh, really? Is that how you're able to do it?
Yeah, I order a kale Caesar. I can order in any city I fly to. I can land there and order it on DoorDash, and I'll be at the hotel when I'm there.
See, some of these people are looking for more than a salad. You know what I mean?
And so am I. That's the problem.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Well, okay. So you have like a pretty focused idea about coming on the podcast. So let's start by telling people like what you do for a living and what made you want to come on the show.
I work with medical devices, not with diabetes devices, but rather with deep brain stimulators. So I work with conditions like Parkinson's and essential tremor, dystonia, OCD, epilepsy, various neurological conditions that use basically a pacemaker, but for the brain. What I do with that is I basically am a teacher. So I teach new hires when we're teaching people how to use the products. I help run courses to teach clinicians. And then I sort of work on the development of the products as well as I take the learnings from all of those users. And because of that background, I naturally wanted to teach this stuff, right? So even though I'm very new at this, I just naturally really want to share the little that I have learned and try to maybe give some other explanations or descriptions or analogies or anything I can to help people understand how to work with the tools that they have and how to get started when they get, into the situation.
Right. Describing difficult or complex ideas to people in ways that they can understand is a skill. Yeah. I'm wondering what you did in college or in professional life that got you to a point where you can do it well.
It's funny. I have a sort of biology background, so that helps. I don't know. I've always enjoyed explaining things. Thinking back to being in high school, taking physics class, I used to love trying to explain like Newtonian physics to people and friction and Ohm's law and stuff. I love coming up with easy ways to explain that stuff. Mm-hmm. And now in my job, it came full circle. I get to do that. I get to teach Ohm's law all the time. I get to explain it in very simple terms that people understand. And I just found that I love it.
How long would it take you to explain it to me?
I can do it right now. So Ohm's law is often taught as sort of an equation, but that's not terribly useful to people. A better way to think about it, and Ohm's law is something that describes the behavior of electricity, right? So when you think about, if I were to push something across the floor, if I were to take a box and push it across the floor, how hard I'm pushing on that box is voltage. So voltage is how hard something is pushing electricity through a wire. And the only reason that box doesn't fly across the room is because there's friction, right? Sliding across a carpet, it's sliding across whatever. That friction, that resistance to the force is impedance or resistance, depends how you look at it. And that's another variable in Ohm's law. So you have a certain amount you're pushing, you have a certain amount that things are pushing back. In the case of a wire, that's just the actual physical resistance of the metal or whatever the material is that's resisting the movement of electricity. So you have a certain amount you're pushing, a certain amount the material is pushing back, and then you're going to have some sort of result. How fast is the box moving across the floor, right? And that's current. That's how much energy is actually moving through the wire. So then you can sort of build intuition around it and think, all right, well, what if suddenly that carpet is ice and it's really slippery, but you're still pushing with the same voltage? What's going to happen to your current? It's going to suddenly shoot up.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Because now it's really slippery. You're still pushing the same amount, but you're pushing it across ice. So it's going to go really fast.
Why does that make the current go up?
That's the idea of going through a really low impedance wire versus trying to go through, say, something that's an insulator or something that's wooden. That's like pushing a box into a wall. right? You can push as much as you want. You can turn the voltage up as much as you want. The current's not going to flow through that wood.
Okay. And we want that because with, I'm guessing, a smaller wire, we can send more.
Not necessarily more. The reason it matters, it impacts a lot of, well, it impacts a lot of things, but it impacts how you design things. It impacts for deep brain stim, which I work with. It impacts, why might you want a system to be in something called constant current or constant voltage mode? So there's different ways you can deliver electricity. You can tell a machine to maintain a certain voltage, or you can tell a machine to maintain a certain current. So you can sort of think of it like cruise control in a car, right? You can tell the car to hold the gas pedal at a certain spot with your foot, but if you come to a hill, your car's going to slow down, right? Mm-hmm. Or you can go into cruise control where it's going to detect that you've hit a hill and it will press the gas pedal down for you. That's constant current versus constant voltage, right? It's trying to maintain a steady speed, even though the impedance is changing. It's going to change the voltage in the background so the current is constant.
Okay.
So there's implications for things like that. What are you trying to maintain a steady amount of electricity, or do you want the device to just push with the same amount the whole time? So there's just different ways of thinking about electricity.
Okay. What's most interesting to me is that that's how your brain works. And there's something about the way I talk about diabetes that made sense to you.
Yeah, big time.
That I find interesting because, trust me, I'm not going to understand electricity if you and I talk for another 4 years. I swear to you, what's been in the news lately that makes this point? Tesla moved one of their cars from a 12-volt system to a 48-volt system.
Yeah.
And that means fewer or less wiring or something like that. And all my brain said was, I don't understand. Why did the number go up if it's, I don't understand.
You know what? I asked the same thing. So it's really funny, that whole Tesla thing. I read more about it. It's really more that they're using essentially Ethernet to connect everything.
Right.
They're using, it's less about the voltage and almost more about the methodology with which they're connecting things. But I also found that very confusing.
Yeah, I was like, I don't understand why this is happening. I also was a person for 2 years, was like, I don't understand insulin sensitivity. Why does the number get higher when it gets weaker? And I mean, I understand. Right. I understand why. But I really do. I mean, we just talked about it a minute ago. Like, 1 unit moves you, if 1 unit moves you 10 points, then 2 units moves you 20 points. That's, obviously the lower the number, the more insulin you use. I get it. Like, I really do. But all my brain thinks is, why did the person who designed this idea not make it more intuitive? Like, because
why couldn't you just come up with a power value?
Yeah.
Or something like a strength value. Yeah, you could.
Describe it a different way so that it makes sense instead of your dorky engineer way that you thought of saying this, which I know is completely accurate. I'm not arguing with people who understand it. It's just, I'm telling you, for regular people, you hear it and you go, I don't understand. Why did the number go up, but the insulin got weaker? That's confusing. So let me ask you just very quickly, how do you find the podcast?
How did I find the podcast? So I had a friend in college who was also diagnosed as an adult. And when I reached out to her to give her the news, the first thing she did was send me the links to the Pro Tip series.
Oh, cool.
And she said, this is where you start. And yeah, it changed my life, man.
Oh, well, I want to know how, and I want to know why it struck you the way it did. And, what was valuable for you. I really would like to pick through your experience with it.
Yeah. Part of the story and part of I think the problem is getting diagnosed as an adult. I don't think you get the level of education and support that you might get as a kid or even as a parent of a kid. Mm-hmm. You're not at some pediatric endocrinology center where you have this big team. You're seeing an endocrinologist, an adult endocrinologist, and they're going to prescribe you your stuff and give you your basics. And that's basically what you get.
Yeah.
Finding a place to learn about the variables, the variables of pre-bolusing and the different variables of the food and the different, for me, in the same way I just described Ohm's law, I needed that explanation for insulin. I needed intuition around insulin, because that's my whole thing when I teach is I don't want people to understand. I don't want them to write down an equation to be able to calculate Ohm's law. I want them to have intuition around Ohm's law. And I needed intuition around insulin. And that's exactly what you were able to provide to me.
Wow. Okay. I'm stunned, honestly, because if I had to...
I mean, your description, I remember your description about tug of war, right? And sort of this tug of war between the insulin and the carbs and the idea of getting the insulin to start pulling the sugar down to get some momentum before you get the carbs digesting. And just that whole concept is so, key to all of this.
Yeah.
And then you add on to it, you start to layer into it the idea of an algorithm and insulin on board and all this stuff. And it really is about building a true intuitive understanding of what's going on. I feel like if I try to control my sugar just with numbers and counting alone, I can hardly keep my sugar controlled doing it the way I'm doing it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I just think it's really important to have that understanding because it also takes some of the fear out. It allows you to be dynamic and reactive in a way that you can't if you're simply following a checkbox. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the fear gets eliminated because you have at least some idea of why what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And therefore what you might need to do to fix it.
Exactly. Yeah, this happens. So
right. If your only fixes are what your doctor said, oh, this happens, do this. That's covering one situation, mm-hmm. right? Having some understanding of how things work is just so valuable. So yeah, your tug of war description certainly helped me. I've been trying to think of analogies of my own as I think about it. I sometimes think of it sort of like a fire, where when you eat the food's gonna combust in your stomach mm-hmm. and sort of put off heat, right? And that heat's gonna make your blood sugar go up. And insulin is the hose, the fire truck spraying water on the fire.
Yeah, I've heard it said that way too.
And sometimes that just sort of makes sense, especially the idea of because when you think about the timing of all this, right? The fact that the food takes time to digest, it's sort of this slow burning fire. And sometimes it lights right up because you eat a candy bar and it's an inferno mm-hmm. and it burns out really quick because it's a super hot fire. Or you might have, your pizza and it's this slow burn that gets hotter and hotter and eventually fades out, right? And that needs different water, right? If you douse that slow burn with a ton of water, it just drowns, right? You have to sort of match the fire to the water that you're providing it.
Right. Yeah, before I figured out to talk about the tug of war, which I think is elegant and
it's simple, necessarily simple.
I used to say, and you should be interested. I think you'll be interested in this. I used to say to people, imagine a scale of justice, but on each side there's a small hole in the pan. And, think, yeah. and you're putting kind of carbs and insulin on either side, and then they're draining out at different speeds. And then you can reach in and take out some of the insulin or put some more in or add more carbs.
I love that.
It's a good idea. It's too convoluted to explain well to people. But
it's step 2, right? You start understanding the tug of war, but you need to eventually graduate to what you just described because that's happening whether you like it or not.
Yeah. What I realized is if I explained the tug of war to people, they didn't need the second explanation because once they understood the tug of war, they'd figure out the rest on their own.
Yeah, that's fair. And they'll see those variables in their own way.
Right. And so I let it go. Also, bare bones, you don't know how much time I spent explaining to people what like a scale of justice was. And it would throw off the teaching moment.
And you're getting into a whole description of the how a scale of justice works. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what happened. And have you ever heard me tell the story about where I came up with the tug of war thing?
I don't think so. No.
I was just prior to the podcast, I was a blogger who would just find themselves in the situation where people online would tag me in posts and say, that guy can help you. That was sort of like how it started. And I would eventually have these like private phone calls with people to the point where my wife's like, oh my God, what are you doing? I actually one day I took off a Friday and I talked to somebody every 45 minutes all day long because I felt bad about them piling up in my inbox. And I basically just explained insulin over and over again all day long to these strangers on the phone. And I remember thinking, if I recorded this, I wonder if they couldn't all listen to it at the same time.
Well, it's so funny. It's so similar to what I do for a living because there's certain topics for our products where I'm kind of the guy who explains that topic. Mm-hmm. So whenever that question comes up, it's sent my way and I end up explaining the same thing a lot. So I get that.
But you have to, though, because as much as you can say, I've already recorded it, which I have to be honest with you. Pro Tip series runs from It's been remastered, runs from episode 1000 to 1026. Just go listen to it. It'll change your life. It'll put your A1C in the sixes, probably in the low sixes. If you really understand what I'm saying, you could get into the high fives without much trouble. And I'm not talking about being low carb. I'm just talking about understanding how insulin works. But the problem is the way social media works and the way even podcasts work is that everything, no matter how valuable it is, it becomes old at some point. And then people cycle out. And as much as like right now, this is kind of convoluted, but like I can picture 10 people in my Facebook group whose avatars I know. And these are very active people. They're very engaged right now.
Sure.
But 6 months from now, those 10 avatars will be different people. And so it's my job to recognize when the turnover happens.
You have to rehash.
And just go over it again. Except you can't, except that I also have longtime listeners who've been listening to the podcast for years. I can't refeed them the pro tip series every, like every 4 months. Like here they are again. You know what I mean? Like I had to spend a lot of money to remaster the pro tip series just so I'd have a good reason to put them back out again. Cause I thought it was going to piss people off if I just put them back into the feed again. And it would have pissed off the old timers and it would have made everybody who's new super happy. So you're always playing this game of keeping, the best way I've ever found to explain it to people who are not involved in this business, which is like reaching people digitally, is it's like trying to keep a rock hot with a match. And, you can get the rock up to temperature and keep it there if you hold the match there. But the second you pull the match away, the rock is stone cold again. and so you're constantly trying to keep the rock warm with new content. So like you told me before we started recording, I've listened to like your management stuff. It changed how I think. And it was very nice of all what you said earlier. But by the way, what you said, Christian, when nobody was listening, doesn't do me much good. But anyway, but I don't listen much to the conversations, but I have the conversations, A, because I think they're interesting, B, because I think staying involved, listening to people with diabetes helps you stay involved with your own diabetes.
Absolutely.
The businessy secret of it is it keeps you involved in the podcast. And so that you keep hearing new ideas. And so that when I figure out something that I'm like, oh, people need to hear this, and I put it out, you're actually still here to get it. And so that's that
makes sense.
Yeah. What's that Greek guy that pushes the rock up the hill? That's how I feel.
Yeah.
I can't believe I can't think of the name. It's because I can't pronounce it. Hold on. What happened?
I was about to say the same thing. I can kind of say it in my head, but I'm not going to try to say it on a microphone.
So I just Googled Greek guy.
Isn't it Ephesus or Sisyphus?
Sisyphus, right? Sisyphus? I think that's how you say it. So
close.
So for everybody who knows, like anytime I sound too smart, I just Googled Greek guy who pushes rock.
I love it.
But now let's find out pronunciation.
Yeah, Sisyphus sounds right.
I think I have it right. Hold on a second. I have to turn up a volume on something else. Sisyphus. I got it right. Hold on.
Sisyphus.
I knew it. God damn it. I'm smarter than I thought I was.
There you go.
By the way, I don't think I'm that smart, so I'm not sure what that says.
So it's a good day then.
I think that I'm good at explaining things in ways that people understand because of my upbringing. I'm adopted by really lovely, hardworking people. I used to say they were blue collar, but I think people will find that insulting. I don't mean it insulting because I grew up in a blue collar household. I have had a number of blue collar jobs. I've worked in sheet metal shops and done things that, trust me, are not fun and don't pay well often. Because I'm adopted, my brain worked differently than theirs did. So I think I was operating on a different level than they were, but I learned to speak from them. So my ideas are one thing, they come out of my mouth in a really an easy way to understand because I don't know a lot of big words.
And you probably had to learn unique ways to explain yourself to them for them to understand you. So you probably learned some good skills at finding different alternative ways to explain where you're coming from.
Yes. I had what they would consider to be big ideas that I thought of as simple ideas. And so when I would just say them simply to me, I'd get like staring. So I've gotten very good at explaining things to people. Wow, Christian, you're the first person to figure that out. Good for you. That was nice. I've never said that out loud before.
That makes total sense, man.
And so then this all happened to Arden, and I started writing a blog. It helped people. People stopped reading. So I moved to podcasting, and I realized that those phone calls I was having with people would probably be interesting to listen to. That's pretty much it.
100%, man.
Yeah. And then 15 years later, you got diabetes.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that crazy? And then I'm still here. And that's the other secret, by the way, to helping people is to not get bored by your job.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I could easily wake up one day and go, I'm not doing this anymore. I've done it once. I've done it 100 times, not doing it 1,000 times. But I don't see
that's
it that way.
That's the beauty of doing a job that helps people, though. I mean, I'm very, very blessed to have had a career in this industry where I, it doesn't always feel like it every day, but in big picture, I get to wake up and know that my efforts there are going to help someone eventually.
Yeah. No, that's exactly how I feel.
It makes work not work.
That's incredibly true. And it sounds so like Pollyanna, right? After I just said I don't know.
Oh, yeah. It sounds cheesy as hell, but it is undeniably true.
Yeah. No, my life is better because I do this. It's so much so that I've been pretty pissed off for the past few weeks because Apple changed how their podcast app works natively. And so
I saw that, yeah,
I'm out of my mind. Like, and it happened today. Like I watched it happen to a person today. They said, where did this episode? I thought there was going to be an episode here. That's not the first one in my podcast app today. And I was like, it's there. You have to just go look for it. I'm like, oh God, do you not even?
For what it's worth, that's why I listen on Spotify.
Yeah, no, I know. But actually, I just got done having this conversation with somebody else. I don't want to rehash the whole thing on the podcast, but I think that because of the...
Is it like publishing wrong to Spotify as well?
No. I was going to say something. You're not... Trust me, you don't know what I'm going to say yet. I just don't know how to get it out of my mouth. I don't want to be insulting because I don't feel insulting about it. But I think that the podcast is overwhelmingly listened to by people who can afford an iPhone. And so they also are not very tech savvy. So they just use the app that's available to them on their phone. And so I have a really crazy unbalance of Spotify to Apple listeners. I'm going to use round numbers because I don't feel like pulling them up, but something like the last 1.25 million downloads of the podcast, 1 million of them are on an Apple device.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. So, and only like 70, I forget what the number is, like 70,000 of them were on Spotify. So I don't even like on Apple, I chart like a major podcast, but on Spotify, I don't pop up on charts at all. I just don't have enough downloads for that to.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
And so I don't know exactly, but you're right. Listen, between all of you and me, I listen to my own podcast on Spotify. So I downloaded on a couple of apps so I can understand everybody's experiences.
Sure.
I mean, you already cursed once, so the editor's already listening for curses, but they to me and anybody who puts out a lot of content. Apple did by changing their podcast app.
That sucks, man.
Yeah, because now people aren't going to, I guess their thought is that if you put out content every day, then every day somebody goes and looks for it. But that's not really true. People wait for the app to tell them about that there's something there. Yeah, hopefully they'll figure out that it's a mistake. But in the meantime, I'm now having to come up with other ways to engage people and, remind them that there's content there all the time without pissing them off and being like, oh my God, I hear from this guy from the podcast every week. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just want to listen to your show, man. I don't want to hear your problems. So anyway, this is what's going on in my life right now. Merry Christmas to me, Christian.
Well, listen, if it's interesting to you, I took some notes over the past 9 months.
I want to hear.
Because I realized in those early months, I recognized just how insane those first months are when you're diagnosed. And just how underwater you are and how much there is to contend with. And I knew that by the time we recorded this, because I knew that was going to be in December, I was going to have forgotten where my head was at then. And I wanted to be able to speak to people who are in that place.
Nice. Do it.
So I took a few notes of just random topics that I thought would be worth speaking to. One was placebo effect and the effect of how data impacts how you feel. And that's the whole idea of once I had a CGM on, which thank God for CGMs. I honestly can't fathom how anyone does this without one. But I will say there's such a real effect, especially when you're new at this and you're not even familiar with what low really feels like or high or anything. You'll see a down arrow and you immediately feel low because your brain goes, I'm dropping. I'm supposed to feel low.
No kidding.
And I think that's gotten better for me, but it was a very real effect for several months. I don't know if that's true for other people, but I wanted to at least share it in case it is. And it's gotten better. It's gotten much better because now I can, as you will say, you have to trust that what's going to happen is going to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that takes time. You have to build that trust. And until you have it, you're just kind of looking to the CGM to see, hey, CGM, how am I supposed to be feeling right now? Right?
Yeah.
It has a very powerful effect,
Okay.
sometimes to a detriment.
Like you'll really
So
flip out?
I found that very interesting.
You would like panic?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I would just feel it. I wouldn't feel low. I'd hear an alarm and look at it and say 80 diagonal down, and suddenly I'd feel low in a real way.
Do you think it's possible that it wasn't coincidence, that it was just timing, and that that you were actually low at that point?
Could be, or that I was feeling it in a vague way, but I was kind of unfamiliar with the feeling. And then once I saw it, it was sort of validation of, oh, that is going on. I'm not just tired. Oh crap, I do feel weird.
I got you. Yeah.
When you're so new to the feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. There's that moment where I can see that Arden knows she's low, but it's not low enough for her to care yet.
Yeah.
And it's not bothering her. She's not sitting there going, I know I feel low. I have to jump up and do something right now.
But that took years of confidence, right? That's because she's done this for long enough.
Yeah.
She knows that there's quick solutions to get out of that low if she gets off her butt and gets the juice,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you're brand new, you don't know what it's gonna take.
I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that she also has a vibe for how she feels and what that means for how long she has to do something.
Right.
Yeah, and that you definitely don't have in the beginning.
Yeah, you don't have any intuition. You only have that data.
Right.
So the data is incredibly educational. It's incredibly informative for you to learn the behavior of the insulin and of your digestion.
Mm-hmm.
But it can also kind of rule you until you build any level of intuition of your own.
Yeah. And it's with you still. I mean, you talked about it earlier, right? Like you still have, like, there's a fear that you're living with.
100%.
Yeah. Are you sharing that with your wife by chance?
Absolutely.
Okay. And has she become part of your system?
Very much so. Yeah. It only gets easier, right? I mean, my 3 days after I had the pump, or maybe 2 days after I had the pump on for the first time, EMS came to my house because I passed out in the kitchen.
Oh my gosh.
And my wife found me unconscious on the floor. Turns out I was high. Had one of my first alarms on a CGM with a pump on. I went downstairs. I hopped out of bed to go downstairs because I realized I forgot to bring my bag up that had my finger pricker.
Mm-hmm.
So I went down to check it. And in the anxiety sort of panic of, oh my God, I'm in the 200s. I've never been in the 200s before. And I've got this pump on for the first time. I think all of the adrenaline just made me faint, quite literally.
Christian, you freaked yourself out.
Yeah. I freaked myself out so bad that I just went unconscious. And ambulance came, they checked me out. I was fine, right? They left. I denied I was fine. I'll work out fine. But yeah, it starts out, or it can start out just so, it's like you said, you don't know what you don't know. And that can be just so scary.
Oh, but that's fascinating.
But it also is a really important lesson in, like, you just have to stay calm. Nothing happens so fast that you can't resolve it. Especially, if you're dealing with highs, nothing is happening so fast that you can't resolve it.
Right.
And it's just, but it's until you have a couple good experiences and you see that happen. Yeah, it's amazing how powerful your own thoughts can be.
Can I ask a question that, again, I don't mean this pejoratively, but let me ask it anyway.
No.
Prior to diabetes, were you a lightweight? Like, could I upset you easily?
No.
Okay. So
I'm quite even keeled. I'm very, very rational. I'm a very practical I'm an emotional person, but I'm a highly, highly practical person,
right?
Which usually allows me to overpower that. I think this was the emotions associated with this were powerful enough, and the fears were powerful enough that practicality couldn't win. And practicality takes knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have the knowledge, so I couldn't talk my way out of the emotions and of the anxiety because I didn't have the knowledge to do so.
But you weren't like one of those Tennessee fainting goats before. Like, do you know about those goats that just faint?
Yeah. I've had a few vasovagal drops in my day. I have.
Okay. So it's not crazy
I'm not unprone to that.
Okay.
Not crazy.
I'm right. I think that this is an indication of how much anxiety and stress and panic you were feeling around this high blood sugar.
Absolutely.
Wow. That's really something.
Absolutely.
Your wife think you were dead?
And it's the first time right now. I mean, I'm 201 right now, but I'm not panicking, right?
You're like, oh, I get bolus for this.
This is just my presentation cortisol kicking my butt, which is one of the hardest variables I've had to learn to deal with, honestly, guys, because I teach for a living, right? So doing what I'm doing right now is what I get paid to do, is sit on a microphone and talk to people, and sometimes hundreds of people. And I enjoy it. I enjoy sort of being on and doing that. But God, does it kick your sugar's butt?
Yeah, it hypes you up like huge.
It's unbelievable, the impact of it.
Yeah, when I do it, it's the closest thing. I'm not a drug person, so it's the closest thing to like a high that I feel is that idea of like, oh my God, there's 300 people here. And I have to say something valuable to them right now in a way.
It's a genuine buzz you get, right?
Yeah. Your head gets floaty afterwards. It's interesting.
Yeah.
So
that floatiness, that the same chemicals that are causing the floatiness in you cause crazy insulin resistance in us, right?
Yeah.
So it is remarkable, the impact. I'm still learning that. I've learned the hard way, trying to stay in automated mode on my Omnipod when I'm teaching. No way. I'm going manual mode, temp basal increase at least 25, 50% for the whole day. And even then I'm correcting through the day. And
so the algorithm's working well for you otherwise, but you just can't expect it to kind of cover such a crazy out of nowhere leap.
The algorithm's working okay. So the algorithm's an interesting thing. So a couple things about that. So I think the algorithm for me, because I've been honeymooning most of the time that I've had this, and I've been sort of moving in the direction of needing more and more, the algorithm certainly has a tough time keeping up because it's based on that total daily insulin.
And you're just jumping around.
I find unless I'm going into manual and sort of cranking it and forcing it to have more TDI to go off of,
right,
it's not increasing on its own.
Okay.
So that's been a bit of a challenge. And as a result, I've actually stopped using auto during the day. I'm now only using auto at night, and I've had a lot better control during the day in manual. Even with just I have a single basal rate for during the day that I've determined myself. I don't have multiple yet or anything. I think I do need more in the morning. I'm going to play with that. But overall, even just having a flat rate through the day has been better than the automated. I think part of that is some of what I've heard other people talk about, where you'll be in such a basal deficit by the time you get to your meal, because it's sort of caught the last bolus for you, that now your next bolus is all screwed up because you have no basal in you. So you end up shooting up anyway.
Right.
And part of that is I probably need to account for it with my own carb ratio, right? So my boluses are stronger. But this is the stuff where the algorithm is so wonderful for what it does big picture, right? The fact that it'll put the brakes on if you're going low and you can't stop that low, what a miracle, right? Yeah. I wouldn't give it up for the world when I'm sleeping. But it introduces these variances into your day that, unless they're really perfectly countering the bad variances that you're having in your day, they're just introducing more variance, right? Which makes things harder, not easier, I find. And what's been also really interesting is, I said in the beginning, I've never done MDI in my life. I started right on a pump, right on an automated pump, which from one end is like, how amazing is that for people who are listening who had to do years of MDI and waited for years for the automated? They're like, lucky you got to start with that day one. And it has been amazing, right? I've been able to sleep better than probably many other people because I've been able to have peace of mind, and that's incredible. What's really hard, though, is trying to actually build intuition around the action of insulin when you have an algorithm messing with the action of the insulin in the background.
Yeah.
Right. It's really, really hard because you'll have an idea of how much you need or how it's behaving. But then you look at your trace and you see the red and you're like, oh, so that was kind of the right amount. And that's kind of the curve that amount of insulin causes with that pre-bolus, except also with no basal, right? It's like, so I'm not actually learning the behavior of the insulin to the amount I would like to. And I found it especially in the beginning, when you have no intuition, I found that to be a challenge. And a part of me wonders, for that reason alone, could it have been worth it to do a little bit of MDI just to learn that a little bit? I don't really regret it. I'm not going to double back on now. I have built some intuition, so I wouldn't go back.
Right.
But that absolutely was an interesting challenge at the time.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting, actually. And you know what? The truth is by putting it in manual mode, you're MDI without the injections, right? You have one basal rate that's happening. True. And you're making decisions about, like, I'm going to inject now. I'm going to give myself,
and then I'm bumping and nudging manually myself. Yeah.
Yes. So you had the experience, but I mean, it's not lost on me what you're saying. It's actually one of Jenny's concerns about modern life with diabetes. She keeps saying, like, these algorithms are getting so good at doing everything and not even like explaining to you what's happening. She's like, there are going to be people who are having success and they have no idea how they're having it. And I wonder.
Yeah. And then when their pump breaks, they're in trouble.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you're going to be, I was going to say out of luck, but I don't think you'll be that far in trouble. But you're going to be in the position you were in where you're like, I have to figure this out. Not everyone is going to do that. Not everyone's going to figure it out. Some people are just going to light their hair on fire and panic until their new pump comes. And that's true. That's interesting. I'm glad you did what you did. You know what I mean? Like I like that you put it on manual so that you can, because it gives you that opportunity. It's not why you put it there, but it does give you that opportunity to use it.
Well, the other interesting thing, we were talking about the CGMs before, and you're asking about my wife and sort of the communication there. And one of the interesting things that came up was, especially in those early months, I was really just watching that number, right? I had the Apple Watch on, and it got to a point where she was starting to become concerned. Like, I think you're becoming genuinely obsessive watching your sugar.
Okay.
And I'm sure this is something that has come up before, and is not an uncommon thing, especially when you're new.
Yeah.
And my explanation to her, which I still very much stand by, it's how I looked at the time, is that is my only way to learn. The more I watch that number, if I watch every single dot, I will be building as much intuition as I can to understand the impact of my actions on my sugar. And I still kind of see it that way, but there is also, of course, a balancing act, because it will take your life over, right? So it's like anything, you want to give it your all, but you can't give up your life in the process. And when you're really early and in it, that's a hard thing to keep sight on, right? It is easy to become obsessive.
There really is, between obsessive and learning.
Yeah. And in that way, I envy the people at a CGM, right? Like, oh my God, you get to go 2 hours and just not think about it and just hope for the best. How lovely, right?
Yeah, well, until the best
until you go
work
do the
out.
finger prick and you're 400, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the trade-off.
Yeah. Until you're a fainting goat, and then you're like, oh, geez, I guess I could have paid attention.
CGM. Exactly. So it's ignorance is not bliss, right? But there's also there is another end of that spectrum, and My wife was concerned I was there. I don't know if I was there, but it's definitely a conversation that came up on numerous occasions.
Yeah. Isn't it funny? If you gave her a low blood sugar, she'd be right next to you in 5 seconds. She'd be like, oh God, you're right. We should watch this. But no, it's very, it's interesting that you bring it up like this, because a lot of what I knew about diabetes was built off of me testing Arden a lot in the beginning. So no CGMs, no pump even. And I would test. And my endo would be like, why are you doing that? My endo, Arden's endo. Why are you looking at that so much? Stop testing her so much. You tested her 15 times today. There's no need for that. And I was like, I don't know what you're saying. I'm trying to figure out what's happening. Like, I don't know what's happening.
I would be doing the same thing, man. My daughter will be finger pricked every 10 minutes so I could learn how to keep her as healthy as possible.
Yeah. I'm like, I don't know what's happening right now. I have to figure it out. And so before CGMs, I acted like a CGM. And I just was like,
I get that.
Yeah. And actually,
I
you know
really
what?
do.
What did we do during COVID? I was doing all these Zooms during COVID with people. And this one lady came on one day and she's listening to everybody. She's like, she raises her hand. She's like, I don't have a CGM. Like, what do I do? And I said, I don't know if this is scientific, but test yourself like every hour and make a little graph, like draw out like on a graph, and just, you won't know what's happening in between, but maybe
get a Contour Next and it'll draw your graph for you in your phone.
Okay. Well, this is a couple of years ago. I don't know if that would have done that then, but that's a great idea.
True.
Is that what that app does? Hold on, Christian.
Yeah.
contournext.com/juicebox. There you go. I didn't.
Yeah. I just pulled mine up right now. It's brilliant, man. It basically will draw out every finger prick you do. If you have the app open on your phone, it immediately sends it from Bluetooth to your phone. So it's also nice because, especially if you're dealing with a low or something and you're not mentally at your best, you do the finger prick, the numbers on your little on your meter, you got your pump controller out, you're trying to figure out what to do. Now the meter's gone black because you timed out. Well, you can just pull the phone out. It's got the result right there as a notification.
Yeah.
It's available to you. And also if you're dealing with if I'm dealing with an issue, a high or a low that's taking some time, right? Like it's not a one finger prick low, if you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then it's really nice because you can see a bit of a trace. It's going to plot the last cut. Like if you do a couple finger pricks together, it actually pulls it up, zoomed up on the screen to see those couple as a line graph. It's really clever.
I have to say, you just taught me something. I'm sure the people from Contour are listening now and going, great, this idiot doesn't even understand how the app works. But I'll shift this conversation. That app is even better than I tell you it is in the ad. What do you think of that? So,
and I would say, like, anyone who doesn't have a CGM, it's a no-brainer because it like, to your point, it's kind of a non-CGM CGM if you do it enough.
What I ended up saying to the woman was like, look, maybe this will help you. Like, do it every hour, create yourself like a little graph. It's going to be jagged, but at least I said, just kind of smooth those curves out in your mind and try to imagine what might be happening in between. And she did it. And we were doing the Zooms pretty frequently during COVID. And one day she came back and she started to like get control of things. And she's like, this really helped. And I was like, God damn, I was guessing, but cool.
I just said anything.
Yeah, well, not anything, but yeah, like I was like, I didn't know if that was really going to help or not. And sure enough, it did. But anyway, my experience with the doctors telling them that all those years ago is basically what your wife was saying to you. Like, stop paying such close attention to it. It'll be okay. But I think there's a fine line between the learning and being obsessed. You obviously don't want to be obsessed.
Data is education, right? Yeah. You can't learn without the data.
Exactly. Otherwise, you're just guessing constantly. Yeah. Oh, good for you.
Or going off your feelings, which is very rough. I mean,
but people are so frequently, how do I put it? Usually like chasing ghosts around diabetes. They always think they know what's happening. They're almost never right. So yeah, having actual feedback and data is really helpful. But once you get this whole thing figured out, Christian, I would like it if you didn't look at your CGM unless the damn thing alarmed moving forward. And
so will my wife. And she'll thank you for that.
And
statement.
when you get comfortable, and there'll be a moment when you get comfortable and it'll just happen. That's all.
Yeah.
What else you got on that
It's definitely
list?
happening less. What I find now, the way it started to transition is the alarm would go off and I think to myself, oh, I don't even know where I was at. In a kind of relieving way. Like, oh, I hadn't looked at it for a while.
Yeah. I love that.
And then it develops into, hey, I haven't looked at it in quite a while, and you check it and it's good. And you go, wow, this is cool.
Right. I have to be honest, like since I broke and went to check Arden's blood sugar. So I went and checked Arden's blood sugar. She was 55 and I gave her a little bit of juice and a couple of carbs and she was asleep. I was like, hey, she's awake now, by the way. But I was like, hey, eat these. You're low. I said, also, I'm going to change some of your settings right now, which I did right then and there. I knew what I did was right. I haven't looked again, to be perfectly honest. I just picked my phone up now because I realized I haven't looked since then. And
because you have true faith in Juice. You know what Juice is going to do for her.
I knew what to give her and I knew what it was going to do. And sure enough, that was 10:30. It's 11:10. I haven't looked in 40 minutes and this thing's not beeping. And so I'm not looking. that's that. That's how I handle it.
I had a similar last night. In fact, I was at Newark Airport last night at about midnight, coming back from Minneapolis. Essentially, I was waiting to get picked up and I went low. Not that low, but low for me. I was sort of low 70s down arrow, which for me is like red alert.
I think that should be for everybody, by the way. But go ahead.
Yeah. And so I'm sitting there and, at first I'm thinking, a couple months ago, this would be juice for sure. Right. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, I'm about to be sitting in a car for 45 minutes. And I know I always end up climbing when I sit in that car after a flight for 45 minutes. So I had 4 Skittles and I chilled out and it was fine.
Look at you. That's excellent.
But a couple months ago, it would not have been that way, right? No,
you would have ran back in the airport and spent $75 on a bagel and got to work.
Oh, yeah. I would have chugged one of my juice boxes. I travel the 12 apple juice boxes. I travel with an insane amount of stuff.
Hey, I like being ready.
So, and that's something. It's interesting when I listened to this early podcast from you, and you're talking about you talked about some travel stuff and talked about the idea of being prepared. Right, you don't have to be anxious and you don't have to be scared if you're always prepared. Mm-hmm. And I truly believe that. I travel with a Pelican case, like a big plastic suitcase,
I know,
carry-on size, that's completely filled with pumps, CGMs, restock of all of my sugar things that I carry in my fanny pack. So I have 2 juice boxes physically on me when I'm flying and traveling. Mm-hmm. But I also know if I go to Europe and I use those juice boxes in customs, where am I getting more juice boxes when I go low in another hour? So I always have a bunch of stuff to restock my low treatments because I don't know where I'm going to get the restock.
Fantastic. Christian, I'm giggling because I imagine the person at the X-ray machine. They're like, oh, here's one of these.
They love me,
international jewel thieves, or maybe a sniper coming into town to take out a local dignitary
with the Pelican case. Yeah, I know, and they open it up and it's filled with Big Bird juice boxes. They're like, "Are you sure, sir?"
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking he pops that open. They probably look up at you like, juice boxes. What the hell's going on? Who cares? And then, that's excellent. Go.
And I've given up. I used to take the CGMs out for the X-ray. I don't anymore. I haven't had a problem. Mm-hmm. That has been worth it to me because the impact it has on getting through security is vast. About 90% of the time, the Pelican case gets stopped and gets searched, and that's fine. And they wipe it down. About 90% of the time, I walk through the X-ray machine and don't have to get patted down. And that's really nice. So most of the time, and I fly a lot, most of the time I can walk right through as a person. My Pelican case will get inspected. That's okay. It takes a second. And that's my most normal situation.
Yeah.
Once in a while, I have to get patted down because whatever the X-ray situation is or it beeps, whatever it is. But when I had to take the Dexcoms out and have them intentionally wipe them down every single time, that was
a pain.
The amount of anxiety it caused me to have to declare that ahead of time spiked my sugar so much that it wasn't worth it to me.
Really? Yeah, because they swab them to make sure they're not explosives. They do it with pods and insulin, a number of different things. So,
but for those who, I know a lot of people don't fly a lot and don't travel, especially if you have diabetes. And as someone with my job who was forced to sort of dive right into that and learn it very much the hard way, it's very doable.
Yeah.
It's, they're not your easiest days by any means, but it is absolutely doable.
Yeah.
I have a good story for you, in fact.
Please.
My first time trying to go for a trip for work was probably about 5-6 months after I'd started the pump. I was sort of grounded from travel for a while. I had that paternity leave period, right? I was really getting my crap together, trying to get my weight back up a little bit, which was not going well. That took until I started lifting about 9 weeks ago. And I finally started gaining weight once I started lifting. I went to fly to Minneapolis. I'm sitting on the plane in Newark. I'm already nervous, right? This is my first flight dealing with any of this. I've read about pumps putting out too much insulin on the plane and everything, right? You read all this stuff, you get all nervous. Mm-hmm. We end up sitting for 6 hours on the runway in a thunderstorm and can't go back to a gate. All the gates are full. Eventually the flight gets canceled. I go home. And that was my big success of the first flight. It was sitting on a plane for 6 hours eating protein bars.
Keeping your blood sugar up?
hoping for this thing to end. And that was supposed to be my first time away, right? My first time sleeping in a bed alone on insulin, right? With no supervision, no backup, no wife, which was already scary, right? Going off to Minneapolis to be alone in a hotel room. Well, about 2 weeks later was the next trip that did not get canceled, and that was in Switzerland. My first time sleeping alone in a bed with insulin was in Switzerland.
You were really by yourself. You were, yeah. Did you
Absolutely terrified.
Does your wife know that when you leave, how concerned you are?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially those early ones. Oh my God. It was terrifying for both of us. That's why I have so much stuff I travel with. That's why I go to the overkill I go to, or if it feels like overkill. But yeah, that being the first one, there was just so much to figure out. And it was during the summer. So I'm going to Switzerland in the summer. There's no AC over there. It's like 90 degrees.
Yeah.
The little mini fridge in the hotel barely cools it at all. So I end up having to give, ice packs to the hotel restaurant to put in their freezer twice a day to keep my insulin even cool from being, I'm not trying to keep my refrigerated insulin refrigerated. I'm just trying to keep my walking insulin from denaturing. It's so hot. So yeah, it was an interesting trip, but it went okay, right? I got through it and learned a ton. And every trip since, it gets a little bit easier. The flights get easier. I'm not scared sleeping in hotels anymore. The first couple times, how many alarms can you turn up to loud before you go to bed the first time you're in a hotel room, right? Now it's just another night. So it is amazing how the difference just a few months can make if you,
right.
If you keep exposing yourself to the stuff that's scary and you learn from it, it stops being scary.
Yeah. Even, just the algorithms in general, like using Arden's example from,
oh my God,
from today.
Well, I wouldn't have done it without the algorithm. I don't know if it would have been responsible for me to go fly to Switzerland and sleep overnight without an algorithm.
You just
early.
Didn't know what you were doing. Yeah. I was going to say that even if I didn't go intercede just now, and I don't certainly want Arden's blood sugar to be 55, but it would have hung around 55 until she woke up. She would have woke up and not felt well and all that other stuff, but she would have been alive and she wouldn't have had a seizure and all that other stuff, Right. So even when it can't stop you, even when an algorithm can't stop you exactly where you want to be, not that they're foolproof, but man, they're fantastic, They
are.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's an interesting segue for algorithms. One of the other things that I found very interesting as I was learning, when I was trying to build my understanding of insulin timing and sort of how to, I was saying that because I started with an algorithm, trying to learn the behavior of insulin was a little bit more difficult because it was clouded by the algorithm. That meant I had to then layer in the algorithm into my understanding. And the way I kind of did that is I think of it as based on trying to learn how much extra insulin can your algorithm eat for you. I guess if you're on an algorithm that can take care of highs, Omnipod doesn't really, right? It will only put the brakes on if you're going low. But if you have an algorithm that can address highs as well, then the question would also be, how many extra carbs can your algorithm eat for you before you would have to have actually given yourself more insulin to overcome that, right?
Okay.
For my purposes, it's just how much extra insulin can that algorithm eat, right? Because that way, if I see myself dropping and I see that, all right, it's gone red, the algorithm's putting the brakes on, and I can look and see, well, what's the insulin on board? What's the number? And how aggressively is it going down? Because with no algorithm, you're going to have one understanding of how much you need to treat and how long you have and everything else. But with the algorithm, that's a different answer.
Yep. And
the answer to that question in my mind is, how many extra units can that algorithm eat up for you so that your body doesn't have to eat them up by turning the basal off, right?
Yeah. You can kind of go back too and say, oh, okay, my insulin on board is a unit, but wow, it's cut my basal off for the last 90 minutes. And my basal insulin is a unit an hour. I think this is going to be okay. You can kind of do that math a little bit.
You can mathematically sort of derive how much it's going to eat for you. Yeah.
Right. Now, the value is incredible. The rest of what I didn't say earlier was that as much as I understood with finger sticks, then, I added to that knowledge with CGMs, which Arden's had a Dexcom forever. And, I was able to learn from watching those. But then my next big leap, besides making the podcast and talking about it all the time and trying to figure out ways to explain things, was an algorithm. Like the first time Arden was wearing Loop, I would just look at the companion app for it, Night Scout. And I was like, okay, it's cutting her basal here. And then I'd watch and see, when's it putting it back on, and how much is it giving her back, and how interesting is it that it bolused here but then took away the basal, but that didn't work, so her settings must not be right. So you go back and you fix the settings, then the next time it boluses, it takes the basal away, and it actually manages the blood sugar correctly. And you go, okay, my settings are good now.
Yeah.
Watching it happen on that little screen over and over again until one day it just makes sense to me. Like I flatly just understand what's happening when I look at it almost every time.
And I'm still trying to even piece together, like, for example, if every time I bolus for a meal, it's having to put the brakes on to catch that bolus, does that mean something is wrong? Does that mean I'm bolusing too much if the algorithm is having to kick in? Or is that okay? Right? That's the kind of stuff that I don't know the answer to.
Yeah. So it's all about how the algorithm is built. So for the moment, I can talk about IAPS because that's what Arden's using.
Sure.
It's very aggressive with meal insulin, and then it manages backwards. So I think most of the algorithms kind of work this way.
Which makes sense. Easier to put the brakes on, it's safer to put the brakes on automatically than put the gas on.
Keep bolusing. Plus it keeps you from getting higher. So if you're 90 when you start a meal and, you put in your carbs, it's going to, each algorithm is going to decide a distance in the future a little differently depending on how they're written. It's going to say, look, insulin action is this amount of time. So I'm going to give enough insulin here to cover this food and the basal needs out for a certain amount of time. And then I'll take away basal insulin.
Mm-hmm.
If I see an updrift that I believe is not going away, I'll start adding the basal back again. I think that's what I mean.
And that does it. So then when you hear about, you might need a slightly higher carb ratio on an algorithm pump, that's kind of why, right? Because it has to actually be enough for the food and that basal that it's trying to throw into that bolus.
Right. It's why the people who don't consider fat and protein have trouble on algorithms.
Yeah.
Because they're just covering, even if their settings are rock solid and they're counting their carbs correctly, there are other impacts.
My problem, man.
Yeah. There's other impacts coming that they're not accounting for. And so that insulin's not there.
And then that basal turning off is what screws you, because the timing is such that time when the basal's off, about an hour and a half later, when that would be kicking in, is right when you start to rise from that fat every time.
Right. And even if you bolus right then and there, you haven't had basal for so long, you're kind of fighting a battle on two different fronts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's why I've had more success in manual mode to a degree. I think I've had less issues with that late rise because it isn't turning that basal off in the beginning of the bolus. It's continuing. So yeah, that's interesting to think about.
I'm proud of us both for getting you to that point. Yeah. So if when you're eating lower carb stuff, your carb ratios seem like they work really well and you're having trouble in automation, I would look harder at fat content probably first, fat and protein, things that are going to create a rise later that you're not accounting for with your initial bolus. And, people will say, well, on Omnipod 5, like, how do I do that? And, it depends on your digestion and how the food's hitting you. I mean, maybe you can put it in the initial bolus, or maybe you'll have to make a secondary bolus for the fat rise that maybe, I don't know, you're basically having to pre-bolus the fat rise, if that makes sense, treating it as another
Exactly.
impact. Yeah.
And I've tried both. I've tried doing the second bolus altogether, right? An hour later, do another small bolus for the coming rise. I certainly played with extended boluses, sometimes to a not so great result going low. Just a lot of learning to do still with that. But it's definitely effective, though. It's undeniable to me that using a normal bolus for every food will not be successful.
It's all timing and amount.
Some foods will always need more.
Yeah. And there's reasons for it. It's not magic. So, and it's timing.
Right.
The whole thing is timing and amount. I swear to you, I could make a podcast that is 6 seconds long that I just said, you have diabetes, you're using insulin, use the right amount of insulin at the right time. Figure that out and you're done.
Those golden words you've said, man, they stick with me. Yeah. It's undeniably true.
Listen, Christian, I've promised my wife that I wouldn't stay on too long today because she's on a call and our dog is old. And she's like, please don't make me get up off of a work call to take the dog outside. So I'm going to wrap up with you here.
Yeah.
But I'm having a really good time. This was terrific. I don't say this to everybody. And the other people I don't say this to should not be offended. But if you were to reach back out in a year or so and want to do this again, I'd be up for this. I like the way your brain works, and I'm interested in what you're going to figure out in the next year or so.
I'd love that, man. I'm personally very curious to your point, where I'll be in a year from now. Because when I see how much easier it's gotten and how much more manageable it's become in 8-9 months, and it's still really hard, to be clear. For anyone out there who's at my point too, I'm with you. It's still really freaking hard, but it is moving in the right direction. So I am also eager to see and would love to update you with some time.
Yeah, reach out, please. Also, I regret to inform you that your episode's called Fainting Goat. Sorry.
There are plenty who know me who will say, yep, that's about right.
Also, I know we tried not to say where you work, but I think you gave it away with your air schedule. So for people who really
that's what discretion's all about, right? It's,
people in the know,
put a little mental math in. That's okay.
Yeah, those people will figure it out for sure. Anyway, this was terrific. I really do appreciate it. I love the way you're thinking through all this, and I'm genuinely grateful that the podcast has been valuable for you. And I'm
grateful to you, man. Very grateful.
No, I appreciate it. I really do. Okay, hold on 1 second for me. A huge thank you to Eversense CGM for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Are you tired of having to change your sensor every 7 to 14 days? With the Eversense CGM, you just replace it once every 6 months via a simple in-office visit. Learn more and get started today at eversensecgm.com/juicebox. Arden has been getting her diabetes supplies from US Med for 3 years. You can as well. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. My thanks to US Med for sponsoring this episode and for being longtime sponsors of the Juicebox Podcast. There are links in the show notes and links at juiceboxpodcast.com to US Med and all of the sponsors. If you're ready to level up your diabetes care, the Diabetes Pro Tip series from the Juicebox Podcast focuses on simple strategies for living well with type 1. The Pro Tip episodes contain easy-to-understand concepts that will increase your knowledge of how insulin works, and so much more. My daughter has had an A1C between 5.2 and 6.4 since 2014 with 0 diet restrictions, and some of those years include her in college. This information works for children, adults, and for the newly diagnosed, and for those who have been struggling for years. Go to juiceboxpodcast.com and click on Diabetes Pro Tip in the menu, or head over to episode 1000 of the Juicebox Podcast to get started today with the episode Newly Diagnosed, We're Starting Over. And then continue right on to episode 1025. That's the entire Pro Tip series, episode 1000 to 1025. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. The episode you just heard was professionally edited by Wrong Way Recording. WrongWayRecording.com.